Hey there, Griff Hamlin here from Blues Guitar Unleashed. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. In today's video, we're going to talk about, I'm going to say sort of how to jam alone, or at least a method of jamming alone on an electric guitar. Now, I've talked about this with an acoustic guitar many times in many different ways, but we don't often talk about it with an electric guitar, and this is something that I really love to do. Now, obviously, it's very kind of Hendrix-y sounding, so you might hear me talk about this as Little Wing style playing, because the sort of brain power that goes on behind the scenes with something like this is the same thing that comes up with things like Little Wing or Axis Boldest Love, The Weight by the band, Buddy Guy. There's some Buddy Guy tunes that he does. This, it's obviously not unique to Jimi Hendrix, but that tends to be what people associate it with. So we kind of have to break this into two parts. And the first part is relating chords to their pentatonic scales. Now, kind of a funny thing happens, okay? I'm gonna do just a little bit of theory here for you. The standard harmony rule says that 1, 4, and 5 chords are major, 2, 3, and 6 chords are minor. 7 chords are diminished. We really don't ever use them, so I'm gonna ignore them from here on out. The notes that could potentially get in the way of a major chord are the 4 and the 7. So a major pentatonic scale doesn't have a 4 or 7. Therefore, anytime you play, for example, an A major chord, you can play an A major pentatonic scale. Anytime you play an E major chord, you can play an E major pentatonic scale. Anytime you play a B minor chord, you can play a B minor pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scales follow the chords, okay? In the case of the minor, the 2 and the 6 are the ones that are potentially offending. They are missing. That's it for my theory, okay? It matters. If it matters to you, you'll get that. If it doesn't matter to you, you can ignore it. But it is really cool to understand that anytime you're playing a minor chord, you can play the minor pentatonic scale. You don't have to worry, is it a 2, is it a 3, is it a 6 in the key? Doesn't matter, okay? It's especially important to keep that in mind when you have chord progressions that maybe change keys or don't really follow a key, of which there are plenty, okay? Same thing with major chords. If you don't have to care if it's the 1 or the 4 or the 5, the major pentatonic will always work. Okay, there, that's it. I said my piece as far as the theory goes. Let's jump into how it actually works. Okay, so if you take a major chord, right, good old, bar chord, root on the 6th string, you could call it an E-shaped chord, you can call it whatever you want. And you can put it wherever you want. I specifically did not put any numbers on the fretboard diagrams below. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see a major chord. And on the right side, you'll see in squares are all of those notes. But in circles are the other notes of the major pentatonic scale that goes with it. So there's the root, the 2, the 3, the 5, 6, root 2, 3, 5, 6, root 2. That is the A major pentatonic scale. It is box 2. You could, of course, add the blue notes if you want. I'm not going to get too carried away with that right here and now, but you could absolutely do it, okay? If I move it here, it works the same. Okay, so anywhere, if I play a C, it works the same. Okay, this does not change. It doesn't matter how it works. So I could play G, and then maybe the next chord in my progression is C, so I could play it here. Okay, and I would encourage you to do this. And then A, right? Just pick them and play them, put them together. Notice that I'm really not worried about time. I'm gonna fix that. As you know, I'm always big on time. And the groove is extremely important for getting the sound, right? Getting it to move and have some life and not sound really dead. But for now, we gotta get your fingers wrapped around the things that they need to be wrapped around. Okay, so we've got major chords and we have minor chords. And again, this would be, you could call it the E shape, root on the 6th string shape, whatever you want, root 5th, root flat 3rd, 5th, root, right? So there's the chord on the left, good old box 1 for the minor pentatonic on the right. Right, so that means anytime I play A minor, I could play the A minor, F sharp minor, and any of the ideas that you might have, right, will work. I will talk about some of those ideas here in a second. Okay, now, sometimes we have a major chord that has a root on the 5th string. Doesn't matter where I put it, remember? Right? Now, I'm gonna call this an A-shaped chord or a root on the 5th string major bar chord. And I'm gonna call this the rock and roll style. This is usually how I refer to this because I'm leaving the 1st string dead. You'll notice it doesn't ring. Obviously the 6th string doesn't ring. I don't have a finger there. But I have root 5th, root 3rd, and then clunk. The sort of classical approach to that is that. And you bar with your 1st finger across. But I never play this, and most people who play anything other than classical music don't ever play this, or at least not very often. Okay, so I'm gonna call this the rock and roll C, D, E, whatever. Now, I'll cut to the chase. This is box 5, if you're so inclined. But almost nobody ever does that. We almost never use that. Instead, what we do is we take, see my 3rd finger here, I'm gonna replace it with my 1st finger. And when I do that, I have a different chord shape. What's commonly called a G chord shape. Now you don't have to play this whole thing. Even I'm struggling to play the whole thing. It's a lot, okay? But maybe just the middle 4 strings, or maybe add the top if you want. But what you're really gonna love, so you should be able to do this move very comfortably. So there's C, there's also C. I just, right, flipped around that 1 finger. So now it's my 3rd finger, now it's my 1st finger. Right? Put it on the 6th fret. And slide it up. And then do it again. Right? Look what it sounds like. Okay, believe me, I didn't invent this. Get really comfortable with this. Because this is what usually happens almost immediately. You'll play a chord, but when it comes time to actually noodle with it, you'll get right out of there. Because this shape right here, it's a big ugly shape, but it's the major pentatonic, good old box 1. Okay, so again, why would we play box 5? Which almost nobody has any licks in, although I know a place you can get some. I have a course called 50 Slow Blues Licks by the Box that has 10 licks in box 5. But, like I said, for our purposes, we're gonna just switch over and play box 1. Right now, if you're on the ball, you're looking at that going, wait a minute, the root is up here. I thought just a minute ago, you had me play a minor chord and the root was here. Yes, you are correct. They are relative to each other. That's how that works. Okay, so this pattern is either the major pentatonic scale, if I look at that as the root, or it's the minor pentatonic scale, if I look at this as the root. That's kind of a side note. It's not really part of today's lesson, but if that wasn't clear to you before, hopefully it is now. Okay, so now we have chords and shapes. Chord goes with shape, right? So for example, if I want to play a C chord, the first thing I would do, if I wanted to sort of noodle around it, I'd go to box 1 right here. The first thing I do is make that move. Then let's say my next chord was G. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do this in the key of D because I don't want to go down to an F. Only because I don't want to be way down here in the basement. So let's say my first chord is D. Right, and I just noodled. Okay, I just played some box 1 stuff. My next chord is A. This is a very common chord progression, right? Box 2, right? We just went through this. Let's say the next chord is B minor. And the next chord is G. Okay, so you can hear okay, now what I'm doing is I'm playing those notes without actually letting go. You can do that. You don't have to, but you can do that. It's a cool sound. Obviously, it's a very Hendrixy kind of sound. It is not a requirement, so please keep that in mind. Now, you probably noticed that when I was just playing there just a second ago, it went from sounding real noodly and all over the place to kind of getting really cohesive and musical just all of a sudden. Like the first time I went through, it was kind of erratic all over the place. The second time, it sort of started to come together. Let me, now that you're listening for that, I'll show you again. So again, starting with D, then going to an A, then a B minor, and again, any lick will do, then a G, okay, and now, all of a sudden it sounds a lot more musical. Yes, because I put it in time. That's the only thing I changed. Okay, I started giving it a time framework. So I'm going to give you a quick little very simple time framework to work with here. If you don't have time, right? Now, this is one of those things that I'm doing backwards. Usually I say you have to do the time first, okay? But the reason we can't here is because if you don't know where your fingers go, if you don't know the chords and you don't know the patterns, you can have all the time in the world, it isn't really going to matter. You're not going to know what to play. So you do have to get to the point where you can very comfortably go between whatever chords you choose. Okay, I chose, again, D, A, B minor, and G. That's a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of D. It's a very common kind of thing. It's basically the first 4 chords of Axis Bold as Love, just in a different key, okay? So, if you don't know where to put your fingers, you're gonna have a problem. So we have to handle that first, right? So you have to memorize the patterns, you have to sort of put that all together. But here is a very simple way to sort of create a groove. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically play one beat of here. Now in my mind, I'm thinking 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and okay, it kind of goes like this, you know, that's the ticking and you know, just the groove that's going on in the back of my head. If you got to have that, right? So I'm going to play the root of the chord. 1, and I'm going to play that for the whole beat. 1 E and okay, now again, this is going to be simple. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into position and I'm going to play 2 E and 2 E and and I'm choosing any 3 notes out of the scale. Now it could be a little, if you want to do the little double stop thing, put a bend in it, any 3 notes will do. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1. Okay, now, is that super fancy? No, it's not super fancy. It's not supposed to be super fancy. It's supposed to get you going, okay? So if that's easy, if that's really easy for you, you will have no trouble adding a little bit more, okay? For example, and again, just an example, I could do like one and 2 and 3 and 4 E and 1 E and I should probably play the right chords. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and so you'll notice that every once in a while I maybe played all 4 counts. 2 E and that's really all I do to kind of make it fancy. Now, as you get better, you could do things like interject triplets. Right, so I could have 1 and 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 4 E and 3 E. And do like triplets and do, you know, whatever kind of other things. But that will be, again, fairly easy, fairly straightforward, assuming you can play it comfortably at, I'll say, the easy level. So first, you got to learn all the patterns. You got to be able to play them all. Second of all, you got to put them in that simple groove framework, right? Hold the root, 1 E and give it the whole thing. 1 E and 2 E and that's your entire fill, 3 notes. 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and right? Play whatever you want. It doesn't matter. However, most people really struggle with counting out loud and playing whatever you want. Really important that you do it. So you're probably going to have to go very slowly. As you get a little bit better at it, as you start to get bored, you can hold that first note for not as long. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E. 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 and 3 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1. And when I do that, sometimes I'll make it a little bit more, sometimes not. The basic, I'll say, structure of that single note on one beat and then like 3 notes on the next beat is something that I use remarkably often. It works really well. If you just keep getting more and more complicated and more sophisticated the longer you play it, it spins out of control really quickly. So you have to bring it back, okay? So that's today's lesson. I got to stop it there. I don't want to get too carried away. There's a whole lot you can do with this sort of thing. Obviously, there's gobs and gobs and gobs of licks. There's so much that you could conceivably do. There's different feels. I'm playing in a straight feel, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and if you kind of swing it, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and you get more of the Axis Bold as Love or the Stevie Ray Vaughan version of Little Wing. Whereas if you keep it really straight, you get more like the Hendrix version of Little Wing. And again, it's different and it's got a cool sound to it. There's just a lot of cool things you can do with this. So if you're interested, I do have a course called The Little Wing Lesson that just gets into all this kind of stuff and has gobs and gobs and gobs of licks and ideas and a couple of big giant playthroughs where you can play both in the Hendrix version and like the Stevie Ray Vaughan version. It's not a note for note transcription, but what you find is that when you have like, okay, you know the chords, you know the shapes, you know kind of that groove structure, it's kind of hard not to play exactly what was on the record. You realize there's plenty of options, but it's pretty easy to find, you know, exactly what's on the record. I never really transcribed a Little Wing. I just sort of sat down and played it one day because I had figured out how the chords and the scales work together. I just sort of sat down and went, oh, well, that would be this and that would be this. And like it was just right there because when you understand how it all works, it kind of can't go any other way. And that's how I like to approach that sort of thing because it's really hard to remember note after note after note after note in that kind of environment. That's just a really tough way to learn songs. I know some people do it and more power to them, but I'm not that guy. I have a terrible memory, so I have to know how things work. so that I can just sort of remember the bird's eye view of it and take it from there. So as always, if you have guitar playing friends you think would dig this video, I hope you will share it with them. Again, I'm Griff Hamlin from Blues Guitar Unleashed. I'll leave a link for the Little Wing lesson. I don't even think it's on my course catalog at the moment, to tell you the truth. It's one of those courses that I tend to forget that I have. It's a smaller one, but I'll leave a link to it near this video. Hope you dig it, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.